Western world usually considers the French lifestyle as one full of luxury, where fashion and beauty fill the artesian streets of Paris. Scenic dinners filled with incredible food, cheese and wine made by some of the greatest chefs and wineries in the world. The most alluring men and women in striped shirts and berets making grand romantic gestures and signs of affection. These are, of course, all major stereotypes and show just how little the outside world cares for the more intricate and at times less attractive parts of French society. In reality, France is a massively diverse country made up of nearly 70 million people and many different races, social classes and religions. It is a country with a history deeper than just Napoleon and one with a strong sense of patriotism. This is apparent in the motto of Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, meaning liberty, equality, fraternity, which many French people live by and is incorporated into the laws and life of every citizen. This ignorance that many foreigners have when it comes to acknowledging France as a whole rather than just a few attractive parts is disappointing. However, the French government has been caught out forgetting about their fellow citizens who live outside the major cities, which has led to the formation of the Yellow Vest movement. The Yellow Vests have been holding weekly demonstrations since late 2018, and they have been responsible for major damage and the deaths of 12 people. Yet they have caused a major ripple effect in France that has seen Macron, the current president of France, and the rest of his administration open their eyes. So that leaves the question, how did the Yellow Vest protesters change the French government? To start, it is best to get an understanding of who these protesters are and where they are coming from before diving into their effect in the aftermath of the demonstrations. A vast majority of the original protesters were people from rural areas who had to drive long distances on a daily basis, meaning they burned through vast amounts of petrol. This caused a major conflict to emerge when the newly appointed president, Emmanuel Macron, signed a green tax deal that raised the price of fuel. This was quickly denounced by the working class who felt they were being scapegoated by the New Deal, given how it raised the tax of something that they relied on in their daily lives. To add to their original numbers, members of the working and middle class started to express frustrations about the slipping standards of living, furthering the power of the movement. Most of these protests were organised online, with no clear coordination. This caused the protests to range from small and peaceful to full-on warfare. They focused on Macron as the problem, accusing him of being a president of the rich as he loosened labour laws and slashed France's famous wealth tax while increasing tax for those who are the basis of the economy. This is a prime example of a federal governing body neglecting a vast majority of its citizens in favour of the upper class, and in turn creating unnecessary conflict between social groups. The impact of these protests was immediate, as just a month after the first demonstrations there were 125,000 protesters taking to the streets, and more than 1,200 being taken into custody. Macron was expected to put in anti-crisis measures, while the French minister said that it was a catastrophe for business, it's a catastrophe for our economy. Paris was hit particularly badly with smashed windows, burned cars, and looted shops being the result of over 10,000 protesters. The then US President, Donald Trump, commented on Twitter, blaming the unrest on the new Paris Climate Agreement, before being told to leave our nation be by Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian. Macron was expected to meet with trade unions and business leaders in hopes of finding a solution to the unrest. An estimated 50 burnt cars and dozens of buildings vandalised and looted. The French Retail Federation stated that over €1 billion was lost during the time of the protests. Restaurant trade reported fallen by 20 to 30%, while the head of the Confederation of Small and Medium-Sized Businesses said that the protests could cause up to $10 billion in lost revenue. If all that was not enough to cause everlasting damage to the economy, many believed the protests would lead to massive drops in tourism, when in 2017, a record 40 million tourists visited Paris. It was clear that the protests caused extensive damage to France's economy and well-being, while the government could do nothing but sit back in awe as their policy had now caused major problems for all French citizens. In Macron's first national address following the Yellow Vest's largest protest, he outlines the stance the government was taking on the group. Macron started with the statement that, "We are together," then subsequently called the protests entirely unacceptable. He calls out the opportunists and politicians who are using the anger and confusion caused by the demonstrations to manipulate citizens. He also disapproves of the violence from the protests, saying nothing justifies the defacing of buildings and beating and killing of police. Macron does clarify that he is not against opposing ideals, saying that discussion is something people shouldn't fear and is the basis of freedom. However, when violence exists, freedom stops. He confirmed that he instilled rigorous measures to stop these protests. However, he does see the problem that the people protesting are facing. Macron points out the single women who work tirelessly yet can't improve their financial situation, or the retired workers who are now struggling to live off their fixed pension. Macron takes some responsibility for this, saying that he had clearly been unaware of the people's problems, that he had spent too much time on other issues. He promises to change the situation and says that all changes he has made are with the whole country in mind. Macron says that there is an economic and social state of emergency and hopes to build a society off of hard work and desire for the next generation, backing this up by increasing funding for the educational system. He also states that to increase working conditions, the salary of employees will increase by €100 a month at no cost to the employers, and that he will push for employees to get an end-of-year bonus with no tax, and that he will cancel the tax increases for anyone making less than €2,000 a month. He also talks about meeting with large companies and wealthy citizens to talk about reforms in France's wealth tax, which Macron says was driving people out of the country. He continues to push the idea that he will no longer allow the wealthy to get away with whatever they want and improve the total representation in government. He ends by encouraging discussion about topics like decentralization of the government and the treatment of immigrants, in hopes of pushing for more non-violent approaches to change. This public address highlights the extensive impact of the Yellow Vest protest. The French president acknowledges the protest's plight on national address and was forced to repeal some of his initiatives. There is a key problem with how the French government has responded to the Yellow Vests, and who they are trying to appease with the changes implemented. As Al Jazeera writer Alice Cantor states, there is a prominent lack of minorities in the Yellow Vest movement. The changes that have been made since the start of the protest have been substantial, with many of the laws which would have furthered the class disparity removed. However, France's minorities were ignored during these discussions. It has been a common theme in French politics to ignore the topic of racism. Racism was not once mentioned in the 2017 presidential debates. This pattern continued with these protests. Many people of colour feel uncomfortable joining the movement when during these demonstrations, minorities are actively being abused. An example of this is when a group of white protesters forced a black woman to get out of her car and insulted her in front of her children, telling her to go back to her country. Yusuf Brakni, founder of the Adama Committee, one of the few organisations to join the movement, says he was quite hesitant to join, knowing that the Yellow Vests were associated with violence against minorities. This was despite the fact that he resonated with the issues of unemployment and poverty. Yusuf said that the thing that pushed him over the edge, in the end, was the need for diversity when the government chose to make changes to please the Yellow Vests. This shows that the Yellow Vest protests have struggled to widen representation, further pushing the idea that this is a white movement. It is clear that the issues facing minorities are not central to the Yellow Vests, and the current leaders are focused on the problems threatening the livelihoods of rural white workers, not the minorities who are trying to gain basic equality. A great way to tell how a country is leaning politically is through the polls, and with what has happened over the last term, the upcoming 2022 elections could be key to France's future. Macron's term could soon be coming to the end, as we are now less than a year away from the next election, and the polls represent the fears and needs of the country, as well as feelings about the current administration. Macron has not announced whether he will be running for president, and even if he was to run, only 35% of French people say they trust the government's action on COVID-19. And just 45% have a favourable opinion of Macron, according to two recent polls by IFOP. The current poll leader and third-time candidate, Marine Le Pen, leader of the far-right party, National Rally, has massively narrowed the 22% gap between herself and Macron from 4 years ago, to what is now a 2% lead. Le Pen is expected to focus on those who were neglected by Macron to benefit the winners of globalization, while also honing in on such issues as secularism, separatism, and migration, and less focus on the economy. Next up in third is Xavier Bertrand, who used to belong to the main right-wing party Les Républicains, until a disagreement over the party's treatment of Macron. Bertrand holds 14% of the vote. However, if Macron fails to gather enough votes, IFOP sees him beating Le Pen in the second round. If he is to win, a lot of it will come down to how LR select their candidate, and if he runs under their banner. In fourth place with 10% comes the first left-wing politician, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. founder of La France Insoumise, a party who, bar a few victories in national parliament, has performed quite poorly. Finally, in fifth, the current mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, who has a measly 8% of votes in the polls, which is mostly down to a highly divided socialist party. Note, Macron didn't even announce he was running in 2017 until a year before the election. Yet the polls do show that France has only moved further to the right since the Yellow Vest protests, with a far-right politician leading the polls, while the lefts have crumbled and weakened to the point where they can barely compete. It is hard to warrant the chaos which was caused by the Yellow Vest protests. The destruction of buildings and small businesses seems unnecessary, while the killing of multiple people can't be justified. There was also a clear lack of diversity in who benefits from the outcomes. However, this was also a great example of a group of citizens mobilizing to come together to change legislations that would have led to further poverty, deeper pain, and larger disparity between the rich and the poor. The protests in the end achieved a lot of what they sought out to do, yet it is hard to celebrate their victory given the methods used in the process.